In Beijing, the alliance that was supposed to reshape the world just died in a spreadsheet, and the number that killed it was 21%. The trade lanes between Beijing and Moscow just froze, and this chilling truth is not a technical hiccup but a strategic execution. It happened quietly. Chinese customs data for September 2025 revealed something devastating. Exports into Russia have collapsed by a staggering 21% year-on-year, the steepest fall in half a year. For 2 years, Russia pivoted east, seeking a sanctuary economy with its powerful neighbor, substituting Western goods with Chinese SUVs and electronics in a seemingly durable partnership. Now, the economic lifeline fueling Russia's domestic stability and war machine has been abruptly pulled. This withdrawal, representing over $8 billion in a single month, is the market's fatal verdict on the so-called alliance of convenience. The senior partner found the liability too great. The junior partner is exposed. The question now is what happens when Russia loses the only friend left capable of keeping its complex systems running. The geopolitical implications of this sudden economic divorce are monumental. But to grasp the full damage, we must first examine the single, most critical dependency Beijing just exploited and how Washington forced China's hand. To understand the panic now rippling through Russia's ministries, we must recall the spectacular boom that preceded this collapse. In 2023, as Western firms fled, Chinese exports to Russia soared by nearly 50%, injecting life into a besieged economy. This wasn't just clothing. It was the sinews of a modern state, machinery, electrical equipment, and a $25 billion flood of vehicles that rebuilt Russia's supply chains. Chinese automotive brands conquered the market, replacing titans like Mercedes and Volkswagen. More critically, the imports of crucial dual-use items, semiconductors, microelectronics, specialized machine tools, and navigation devices were sustaining Russia's defense base. These are the integrated circuits and high-priority components that Western governments had banned, only to see them rerouted through China and Hong Kong. This massive reliance, especially on Chinese distributors who commanded an almost 90% share of Russia's microchip market, created the exact vulnerability Beijing just weaponized. The 21% drop means Russian businesses are suddenly starved of these essential components across the entire spectrum of high-value goods. This shift is irreversible, driven by Beijing's clear decision to reduce its exposure to secondary sanctions risk. This systematic removal of life support is a trade war of attrition, fought without a single bullet, and it's testing the resilience of ordinary Russian life in ways Western sanctions never could. It wasn't an accident. It was a calibrated pullback to protect China's greater interests. But what does this devastating 21% collapse actually look like on the streets of Moscow and the fields of Siberia? That's where the real pain begins, and where the failure of Russia's domestic policy is laid bare. The true cost of this economic abandonment isn't abstract customs figures, but the creeping, corrosive strain on ordinary Russians promised stability through national self-reliance. When the flow of Chinese cars, phones, and tools decelerates this sharply, domestic supply chains buckle instantly. Russia's long-touted strategy of import substitution, the plan to replace Western goods with local equivalents, has catastrophically failed, leaving critical industries dependent on the now disappearing Chinese alternative. Take the crucial industrial sector. Despite years of government programs, Russian enterprises still use over 98% foreign-made machine tools, the core machinery needed to produce everything from cars to weapons. After Western suppliers like Germany pulled out, China aggressively stepped in, increasing its share of the Russian machine tool market to over 70%. Now that Chinese supply has been choked, there is no domestic backstop left. This failure is a systemic, long-term degradation. In the crucial agricultural sector, farmers are struggling as their ability to buy imported machinery halves, making essential equipment prohibitively expensive or unavailable. Moreover, the technological lifeline is fraying. The cost of domestic Russian IT software, rushed to replace pirated Western versions, has surged by 30 to 40%, driven by staff shortages and the realization that competitive Russian alternatives are non-existent in specialized fields. This inability to transition is brutally exposed by China's withdrawal. The lack of new SUVs is a symptom of a deeper problem. a quiet corrosion of the nation's industrial and technological future. This is a slow, structural degradation that hits not with a bang, but with the painful, daily friction of things simply no longer working. China is cutting off billions and risking its limitless partnership. What could possibly be worth this kind of cold, calculated abandonment? The answer lies in the global financial system itself. The decision to pull the plug was not made in anger, but through the cold, precise calculus of Beijing's balance sheet, exposing the purely transactional nature of the friendship. China's economic might rests not on its over $200 billion trade with Moscow, but on its multi-trillion-dollar relationship with the Western world. That relationship was under existential threat from continued blatant support for Russia's war machine. Over the past year, warnings from Washington and Brussels grew sharper. Key U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, made it clear that the West would no longer tolerate China's sales of critical dual-use goods that ramp up Russia's defense base. Critically, the U.S. began targeting third-country entities and, most dangerously for Beijing, threatened to impose sanctions on major state-controlled Chinese banks. For China, the risk was immediate. The potential for these banks to be cut off from the global dollar system and the vast, lucrative markets of Europe and North America. Beijing chose de-risking, quietly sacrificing its junior partner to protect its own overwhelming financial interests. This meant systematically minimizing its vulnerability to Western retribution by pressuring manufacturers to reduce exposure. The result was the collapse in traceable shipments like cars and trucks. This strategic pivot clarifies a fundamental truth. Russia needs China far more than China needs Russia. The moment the alliance became an economic anchor, Beijing ruthlessly cut the rope. But this break isn't just about trade. It has already triggered a brutal countdown to fiscal collapse in the Kremlin. This dramatic rupture is far more structural than a slowdown. It's the definitive end of the post-2022 pivot, confirming Russia has no major power economic backstop capable of neutralizing Western sanctions. The export collapse immediately magnifies Moscow's fiscal pressures, especially around energy purchases. China remains a massive buyer of Russian fossil fuels, securing nearly half of Russia's crude exports, but Beijing has consistently exploited this, demanding deep discounts that severely erode the tax base funding the federal budget. This unequal dynamic has effectively reduced Russia to the status of a resource colony, a junior partner forced to accept unfavorable terms. Lower Chinese demand for raw materials, coupled with widening discounts and a strengthening ruble, is expected to push Russia's oil and gas revenues far below the government's own 2025 budget projections, intensifying the reliance on war bonds and domestic debt. The dream of a self-sufficient, China-backed economic bloc has been exposed as a fragile fantasy. The collapse of this supposed limitless partnership proves that even strong tactical alliances crumble when faced with the irresistible gravity of global finance. Moscow's isolation is now complete, forcing the world to confront the immediate instability of a vast, resource-rich nation whose strategic partnership has just been declared officially dead. The question is, now that China